They called him Harold Sundberg, 71 years old, a man of the forest more than of the village. His cabin stood at the northern edge of Älvdalen, a Swedish town that faced the endless wall of pines and spruces. The roof sagged with years of snow, the walls darkened by stove smoke, yet inside everything was arranged with a precision that betrayed his character. On the kitchen table, beside a wood-handled knife and a tin of cartridges, sat a chipped enamel mug that always smelled faintly of black tea with cardamom. Around his wrist, he wore a narrow reindeer leather bracelet, softened by age, given by his wife before she passed. On a shelf above the stove lay a slim notebook filled with sketches of elk tracks, notes about moss levels, wind direction, the sound of cranes in autumn. And by the bed was a photograph in a simple wooden frame. Harold and his wife, Ever, seated on the hood of a blue Volvo, laughing, the forest behind them greener than memory. Harold's reputation stretched beyond the valley. He was the man who never lost his way, who once guided 3 younger hunters out of a whiteout blizzard without compass or map. He said the trick was to listen to the forest, streams, wind. Birds told you more than any needle. Neighbors remembered him splitting wood even when feverish, or carrying sacks for widows down icy steps. He was not talkative, but when he spoke, he measured words like cartridges, never wasted, always useful. Children in Älvdalen said he could smell elk miles away. On the morning of September 24th, 2021, Harold rose before dawn. He fed his dog, Tyr, a sturdy cross of Leica and Elkhound, then packed his rucksack with a thermos, matches in a tin, a spare pair of socks, and his well-worn rifle. He adjusted the green jacket whose buttons he had mended with copper wire, swiveled the photograph of Ever slightly, as if she were watching him leave, and stepped out into fog. Tyr followed, tail high, ears sharp. The forest swallowed them both in minutes. When night fell, Tyr returned alone. His fur was wet with bog water, his paws caked in mud, his eyes wild. He barked, scratched the cabin door, whined as if dragging the absence of his master with him. Neighbors came running. They found the door locked, the lamp unlit, the stove cold. Harold was gone. By morning, police had opened a case. The first report read, Subject, Sundberg, Harold, 71. Missing since September 24th. Dog returned home alone 1:14. Weather, fog, rain, 6 degrees Celsius. Immediate search advised. Volunteers gathered in the square, adjusting headlamps, pulling on orange vests. Police mapped out grids across the bogland west of town. The search began with discipline. Lines of people walking shoulder to shoulder, sticks probing the moss, calling his name. Helicopters circled with infrared cameras, beams cutting through fog. Dogs strained at their leashes, noses down. For 3 days hope clung to them. Harold was a man of the woods. If anyone could survive, it was him. Perhaps he had injured his leg, found shelter, was waiting. Yet the bogs gave no answers. Reports piled in. September 25th, search radius 8 kilometers, negative. September 26th, weather worsened, visibility, 50 m, dogs tracked to Storfjätten bog, scent lost. September 27th, expanded search, no result. On October 3rd, the police commander faced reporters. We must consider the possibility that Mr. Sundberg succumbed to natural hazards. The forest is vast, the bog dangerous. The village did not give up. Neighbors brewed coffee at roadside fires. Volunteers combed ravines. Hunters checked cabins. Tyr was led back to the bog where his trail ended, but the dogs circled, whining, refusing to point. Days became weeks. Snow came early, covering tracks, bearing questions. Posters with Harold's photograph, lined face under wool cap, eyes narrowed against wind, were taped to shop doors. His daughter, Lena, arrived from Uppsala, pleading on television, "My father is not careless. If he has not returned, something stronger than him kept him." Rumors took root. Some said wolves dragged him, though experts dismissed it. Others whispered about debts, secret enemies, though none could name them. Old men said the bog swallows without mercy. A woman in the square murmured of the Skogsra, the forest spirit that lures hunters. Each theory filled the silence the forest left. By mid-October, official search teams withdrew. The report closed. Search area 25 square kilometers covered by ground, canine, aerial units. No belongings recovered. Status, unresolved. Only volunteers kept going, fewer each week, until even they faded. The cabin at the forest edge grew still. Tyr lay by the door, ears twitching at every sound, waiting for footsteps that never came. The command post moved from the school gym to a canvas tent on the forest road, where maps could be weighted by stones and coffee could be boiled without setting off alarms. The weather wrote its own entries in the log. Fog thick as milk at dawn, rain in slanting sheets by noon, a wind that smelled of iron and wet bark. Officers from Mora rotated through with the steadiness of a metronome. Local hunters filled the gaps with knowledge that never made it into manuals. They taught younger searchers to tap the peat with a pole and listen. A dull thud meant soaked sponge. A hollow slosh meant hunger below. On paper, the operation looked exhaustive. Sector grids bloomed across the 1:50,000 lamp material sheets in fluorescent ink. Waypoints multiplied on GPS screens, their alphanumeric names, A12, B7, C19, pretending that the land could be cataloged. A helicopter traced lawnmower stripes above the canopy, the thermal camera painting deer as white flames and humans, if there had been any, like small comets. A warden read out the radio net in a calm that felt borrowed from a different problem. Team A sweep the alder fringe. Team B turn north at the culvert. Team C hold at the ridge. Team K9 report wind at 2 meters per second from the west. They found all the things that prove people live near forests. Beer cans, blue plastic twine, a mitt without its pair, the rusted frame of a bicycle someone had ridden to the edge of a decade and abandoned. They did not find a hat, a belt, a torn cuff, a cartridge box, nothing that belonged to Harold. Inside the cabin, Lena performed her own ritual search. She opened drawers and closed them again, not because she expected the drawer to change, but because her hands needed a verb. On the windowsill, the mug had dried to a perfect sepia ring. In the jacket pocket, she found the spare notebook, the older one. Its rubber band perished, pages crowded with numbers and neat capitals. Elk cows at East Bog, dusk, wind, Inani. Moss height at culvert, 5 centimeters over spring. Tear bell heard at 400 m in fog. Fix Evers frame, backing loose. She set the notebook down and turned the photograph to face the wall, immediately turned it back, ashamed. On the nail by the door, the bracelet's twin, hers from childhood, hung on a loop of twine where he kept keys. She took it and put it on. The first week brought witness statements that were tidy on the page and untidy in their usefulness. He bought matches yesterday, said the Bog was listening. I saw him at dawn, yes. He walks like he's balancing a cup on his head. Dogs were howling the night before. Could have been foxes. Always is foxes until it isn't. A rescue diver named Holt tried to explain peat water to a reporter. It's not clear or dirty. It's a material in between. You see nothing until your hand touches something, and then it's already past your hand. On day 6, Team B radioed a possible, near Storfjadden, 2 depressions a meter apart, where someone heavy had stood, and then there was only the flecks of moss. The dog Freja nosed at the spot, whined, sneezed peat out of her nose, and wagged as if apologizing. The handler marked the coordinates and wrote negative because the options were only that or positai, and the day would not yield tea. Rumors Erevad poacher had beanskog, Thean old culve, the rotten planks giving way beneath weight. There 1 minute, then a cold swallowing that had no surface to break. By day 9, the county suspended the full sweep. It is not fair work, closing a thing that refuses closure. The tent came down. The fluorescent grids folded. Batteries went back to chargers. Radios returned to drawers that smelled of rubber and dust. The file gained a spine and a tab. On the last sheet, the lead investigator wrote, "To be revisited post-thaw." The village continued on the slower schedule that grief imposes. At ICA, the bulletin board carried a flyer with Harold's face photocopied into a fog of dots. The contact number ringed in pen. Someone tucked spruce twigs behind the thumbtacks. The postmistress kept delivering the hunting journal he subscribed to. The girl at the counter asked if she should stop them, and Lena shook her head. Winter simplified things. Snow laid a sheet over arguments. Ice turned the bog's grammar into a rigid sentence, clear, murderous. The river lost its voice and learned transparency. Hunters who had spoken easily now said less, because in a white world the mouth becomes an unkind color. Tears slept by the stove, but rose some nights to step outside and stare into the black notch of the ridge, where a track, if it had existed, would be gone. He spoke the long dog syllable that carries farther than a person's name. Somewhere out there, foxes answered in a key that makes humans feel watched. On New Year's Day, the police conducted a winter review in a room that refused to be festive. The memo that emerged was practical to a fault. Subject: high competence, disorientation unlikely. Terrain: peat with sinkholes, alder fringe, old skid roads. Likelihood: accidental immersion high. Evidence: none recovered. Recommendation: resume after thaw, add cadaver dogs. Review Culvert Archive, 1958 to 1973. The Culvert Archive lived in 6 dusty binders at the Municipal Works Yard, notes in pencil by men who had since become stones in the churchyard. Birch logs laid 1966. Replace. 1 page warned, never heeded. It was easy, after reading, to imagine a boot on a softened plank, the plank sighing, the leg entering a date that did not include return. Spring converted everything back into smell and sound. The bog exhaled tannin. Cranes wrote their tall letters across the sky. The search returned, smaller but no less stubborn. Ground-penetrating radar from Phelan sketched waves under one pool and argued with its own algorithm. The dogs worked in cruciform patterns, alerting on nothing that persisted. A single leather glove surfaced from a brown eddy, not his. A beer can shone like new coin. A blue strip of survey tape pretended to be a message. The radio said, Team A moving to Bjornback and Bend. Copy. And the forest did not copy. Lena developed a taxonomy of grief she kept no notes for. Anger, brief, because it wasted calories. Bargaining, long, because she was practical and wanted terms. Resignation, faked, for talking to officials. Kindness, real, for Tyr, who seemed ashamed to be alive. She sat at the kitchen table, the bracelet on her wrist too large and too dry, and wrote his name in the margins of a newspaper until ink made a small swamp. She phoned the investigator to ask whether the helicopter could fly lower. No, the downdraft kills saplings, and whether they could drain a pool, not without turning the valley into a ditch, and whether at least they could search again, yes. When the press came back and made a write about the unsolved, they wanted a frame, which is what press always wants. Veteran Hunter still missing. One paper repeated as though the words still could pull him from the peat by the scruff. A tabloid in Stockholm made a wolf out of fog. Experts wrote letters. Wolves don't behave like that. Bogs do. An op-ed asked whether older men should be licensed differently, as if aging is a rule book. Lena stopped reading, then read everything, because information was a kind of water, and even dirty water hydrates. The church marked a year with a service that didn't know what it was, memorial without a body, wake without a week of casseroles. The pastor spoke in the tone men use when talking about weather that has killed, respectful of force, skeptical of reason. After the hymns, old Eric told the nearest journalist that Harold once repaired his stove without charging him and once warned him not to follow a fresh elk trail into a stand of young spruce because they're tighter than a lion there. A boy asked whether the forest eats people. His mother said it eats everything in time. Through June, the search logs thinned to brief entries. June 7th, dog Bams showed interest near Alder Cut, negative follow. June 13th, found saw chain by Old Skid. Not his brand. June 24th, radar artifacts. False positives. The police file acquired new paper clips and a civic smell. Tucked among the forms lay a photocopy of the notebook page where Harold had drawn a small map of Bjornbacken and written, Mats drift southeast in wind. Test with pole. The investigator had underlined it and written in the margin, faint with a dull pencil. He knew. Summer dulled urgency by offering its counterfeit answers. Warmth, light, berries in the moss like coins you don't need to spend. People went swimming in the river again. Tourists walked past the bog and said how beautiful, and locals said yes because they were not tour guides. Tyr aged visibly, his muzzle a white flag, his once sure trot less certain. At 4 in the afternoon he still sat by the gate, ears cocked toward the ridge as if an appointment might still be kept. In August a rumor with sharp teeth returned. Poachers on the night track. Someone had heard an engine where engines should not be, seen a beam moving low where beams had no business. The police knocked on 3 doors that were already open and polite. Men in clean boots said they had been home. The ledger recorded no finding, which is the state's way of saying we looked and the world refused to be simple. By the second week of September, the light recommitted to brevity. The cranes gathered on stubbled fields to practice goodbye. Hunters checked rifles and permission slips, compared notes about weather and rut. The bog that had swallowed a year throbbed with the density of ripe things. Lena packed a small backpack, water, a thermos, Tyr's lead, and walked out alone to the edge of Storfjätten. She did not step onto the mats. She stood where the ground was still ground and said her father's name into mist. The name came back thinner, which is still an answer. Tyr whined softly, as if he too understood that answers come in degrees. She meant to turn back then, but a hunter's horn sounded from the west, 3 notes that meant meeting to the men who used them and music to everyone else. Tyr's ears pricked. A dog's bark, high, rhythmic, purposeful, carried across the tamarack like a thread. Klura, somebody would say later, the pointer with an arrogant tail. The barking shifted to a different key, the one that says this rather than maybe. Voices rose. A man called for a flag and someone else for a bag. Wind slid past Lena's cheek and smelled briefly of iron. She did not know it yet, standing with her boots just shy of sponge and her hand on Tyr's neck, but the bog was about to give back a sentence fragment. What Klura's handler first saw was not a body, nor even cloth, but a pale arc, smoother than branch, paler than reed, rising just above the skin of the bog. Dogs do not invent bone, they find it. The handler knelt, pressed his palm against peat, and the surface sighed. With 2 fingers he coaxed the arc upward, and mud yielded a length of ivory, stained, jointed, unmistakable. The radius and ulna of a human forearm, hand absent, wrist circled by a band that once was leather and still bore the corroded tongue of a buckle. The bracelet. The radio message was clipped because men in uniform learned to abbreviate astonishment. Central confirm. Possible human remains. Storfjätten sector. Flag deployed. Request evidence unit. By dusk, the site was roped with red tape that fluttered like warnings in a language no one needed translated. Searchers stood in a ring, caps in their hands, dogs restless with the sense that they had crossed a border. A forensic team arrived with gloves and trays. The arm was lifted, rinsed in bottled water, laid on stainless steel. The leather band was photographed, then removed. Someone placed it in a zippered pouch labeled with the name they already knew. At the command, Tint, the lead officer wrote in a logbook with a hand steadier than his throat. September 14th, 22, canine find, human forearm, bracelet intact. Coordinates, 61 degrees 14 minutes north, 13 degrees 49 minutes east. Preliminary ID, probable Harold Sundberg. The news passed through the village faster than any radio. By evening, Lena opened her door to find neighbors leaving small parcels, rye bread, a candle stub, a tin of coffee, as if grief was still rationed like sugar. Tears sniffed every visitor, whined once, then laid down by the mud-streaked lead, his eyes refusing sleep. The press returned in convoys. Headlines in Stockholm carried the drama. Hunter's arm found after year in swamp. A smaller column in Moritidning was plainer. Sundberg remains recovered. Investigation continues. Reporters asked about wolves again, about poachers, about ghosts. One television crew staged a live shot beside the bog, lights bleaching tamarack into chalk. Locals turned away. The forest does not consent to performance. The arm traveled to the National Forensic Laboratory in Linköping. There, in rooms that smelled of disinfectant and calibration, it was cleaned, measured, scanned. The DNA from marrow still carried enough code to be matched against Lena's cheek swab. The report returned with no drama. Identity confirmed. Sundberg, Harold, 71 years. Cause of death, undetermined. No trauma evident on bone. No cut marks. No bullet. No fracture. The bog had written its own autopsy, absence. The file fattened with appendices. Photographs of bracelet corrosion. Soil composition analysis, pH 4.2, high sphagnum. Dog handler testimony. Alert persistent, indicated bone. Map overlays. Last known location versus recovery site. Witness statements, revisited. He said the bog was listening. Theories resurfaced, sharper for having a bone to cling to. Version 1, accident. He crossed mats that had held for years. One yielded. He plunged. The bog does not return full bodies, only fragments, as tribute. Version 2, crime. Poachers confronted him, a struggle, body concealed. But why only one bone now? Where was the rest? And no marks on the arm. Version 3, myth. The Skogsra lured him with her hollow back. Hunters shake their heads, but admit the forest keeps bargains people never sign. Version 4, voluntary exit. That an old man, widowed, carrying his grief like a second rifle, stepped into the bog on purpose. Lena rejected it with a flat voice, but she underlined the forensic phrase, no trauma, twice, as if daring the words to say more. An official communique from the county police ended with language that was both precise and useless. Investigation remains open. Recovery of additional remains possible. Cause of death cannot be determined at this time. In the church, candles were lit as though for a body present. The bracelet lay in a glass case beside the altar, cleaned but still scarred, the leather dark with centuries compressed into 1 year. People filed past, murmured, touched the glass. Tear barked once when someone leaned too close, then whined until Lena led him outside. At home, she placed the bracelet on the table beside the old mug and the faded photograph. She opened the last notebook and wrote a line he had used in lectures to her when she was a child. The forest doesn't lie. It only doesn't tell everything at once. Outside, cranes rehearsed departure, their cries writing punctuation in the sky. In the bog, unseen, other bones still kept their silence. The funeral was held on a Saturday that pretended to be autumn but still carried summer's breath. Only the arm was buried, the coffin narrow, lined with pine. On top lay his hunting knife, closed, and a sprig of juniper. The pastor spoke of fragments, how scripture too had come to us incomplete, and yet we believed. Lena stood with tears lead wrapped twice around her wrist, the dog whining softly, his muzzle pressed against her coat, as though to scent the man who no longer gave commands. The newspaper the next day carried 2 different tones. Dalarna Daily wrote in solemn blocks, remains of missing hunter interred, community bids farewell. A tabloid headline screamed, mystery of the swamp arm. They printed diagrams, arrows, a sketch of a man sinking chest deep. Letters to the editor argued, better trails, more regulation, stronger boards across culverts. One older man wrote that no map will stop the bog from being itself. In the weeks after, the rumors did not abate. Some said wolves had carried pieces into different quadrants. Others whispered he had been shot, the rest of him hidden deeper. A few said quietly that perhaps he had walked willingly into the peat. The the way certain elders and sagas walked onto ice floes. These theories buzzed around the single fact. Only the arm had returned, and the rest of the body was still written in the language of absence. The police report closed formally in December. Case disposition, accidental death, contributory terrain factors, body unrecovered. The binder went to archives, where it will live until mold or bureaucrats erase it. But in the village, the case remains open in speech. Hunters mention him when mist thickens. Children dare each other to run to the alder fringe where the dogs barked. In winter, when ice hardens, people glance at the bog as if it might knock from below. Lena framed the photograph again, this time placing it in the hallway where morning light touched it first. She kept his mug on a shelf, cracked but intact. She wore the bracelet on days when memory threatened to scatter. On the anniversary, she read aloud from his notebook, each entry sounding like a verse from a private psalm. Moss height, wind direction, bird calls, elk spoor. She whispered thank you to margins no one else had written in. The community installed a plaque near the forest road, in memory of Harold Sundberg, 1950 to 2021, hunter and neighbor, who did not return from the forest. May this place remind us that wilderness gives and withholds alike. Visitors sometimes leave cartridge shells, sprigs of spruce, or coins dulled by weather. Winter came again, the bog tightening its grip under ice. Tyr died in his sleep before spring, buried in the garden with his collar and a piece of the woolen blanket. Lena said he had kept his last appointment. When the cranes returned and called their high letters across the valley, she read the words her father once told her. The forest does not lie. It only waits. The file is closed. The plaque stands. The arm rests beneath pine. Yet in every telling, the story remains incomplete, as though the bog had bargained. One bone for memory, the rest for silence. And that silence is the truest thing the forest gives back.